Have you ever missed a call and told yourself, I'll call back later? Not because it wasn't important, but because you were busy or tired or simply not in the mood to talk. And in that moment, it felt harmless. Just a small delay, just a simple choice, nothing serious. But what if that one missed call was the last chance you would ever have to hear that voice again? Would you have answered? Would you have stopped whatever you were doing and picked up the phone? Or would you have done exactly the same thing? This is a story about a call that was never answered and a silence that came after, that never left. That evening felt like any other. Nothing unusual, nothing special. The sky was slowly turning darker, the light outside the window soft and fading. He was sitting at his small desk, laptop open, a half-finished task on the screen. His attention not fully there. His mind slightly tired. It had been a long day, not difficult, just full, full of small things that slowly drained his energy. Emails, meetings, conversations that didn't really matter. By the time evening came, he just wanted quiet. No more talking, no more thinking, just space. He leaned back in his chair, closed his eyes for a moment, let out a slow breath, and then his phone rang, a simple sound. Nothing urgent, nothing alarming, just a call. He opened his eyes, looked at the screen. A name appeared, familiar, very familiar. He stared at it for a few seconds, not surprised, not confused, just aware. It wasn't the first time this name had appeared. There had been other calls, other moments when the phone rang, and he chose not to answer, not because he didn't care, but because he believed there would always be another time, another chance, another call. He watched the screen, the name still there, waiting. The phone continued to ring, soft, steady, patient. He felt a small hesitation inside him, a quiet voice whispering, "Maybe you should answer," but another voice quickly followed. "You're tired. You can call back later. It's not urgent." And that voice felt easier to follow, more comfortable, more convenient. So he didn't move. He didn't reach for the phone. He just sat there, listening to it ring until it stopped. The silence that followed felt normal, nothing heavy, nothing strange, just quiet. He looked at the phone again, the screen now dark, the call, missed. He picked it up. For a moment, he considered calling back, just quickly, just to say hello. But then he looked at the time, a little late. He sighed softly. Tomorrow, he thought. I'll call tomorrow. He placed the phone down, turned his attention back to the laptop, tried to continue what he was doing, but something felt slightly different, not strong enough to stop him, but enough to be noticed. A small discomfort, a quiet uneasiness. He ignored it, like he had done many times before, because it was easier to continue, easier to stay in the moment he had already chosen. Minutes passed, then more. The evening moved forward, slowly, calmly. Nothing changed, nothing happened, but something had already begun. Something invisible, something he could not see and could not undo. Later that night, he lay in bed, the room dark, the world outside, quiet. He closed his eyes, ready to sleep. But then, that same thought returned. The missed call, the name on the screen, the moment he chose not to answer. It replayed gently, without force, but clearly. He opened his eyes again, stared at the ceiling, And for the first time, he asked himself a question. Why didn't I answer? There was no clear answer. Only small reasons, excuses, things that felt valid in the moment. But now, in the quiet of the night, they felt weaker, less certain. He turned to his side, reached for his phone, looked at the call log. The same name. Still there. Still recent. Still reachable. He thought about calling. Right then. Right now. But then he hesitated again. What if they're sleeping? What if it's too late? What if I'm overthinking this? So once again, he made the same choice. Not now. Tomorrow. Tomorrow would be better. Tomorrow would be easier. Tomorrow would come. He placed the phone back down, closed his eyes, and this time, sleep slowly took him, quietly, without warning, but somewhere, between that moment and the morning that followed, something changed, something ended, and he did not know it yet. Because sometimes the most important moments in our lives do not feel important when they happen. They feel ordinary, small, easy to postpone, easy to ignore, until one day we realize they were never meant to be delayed. And by then, it is already too late. The next morning arrived quietly, just like any other day. Soft light slipping through the curtains, a gentle warmth touching the room. Nothing unusual, nothing urgent. He opened his eyes slowly, not fully awake yet, his mind still drifting between sleep and reality. For a few seconds, everything felt normal, familiar, safe. Then, a small memory returned. The call, the missed call, the name on the screen. It came back gently, not painful, just present. He reached for his phone, almost automatically, as if his body already knew what to do. The screen lit up, notifications, messages, and then something else, a new message. From a different number, unknown. He stared at it for a moment, not curious, not yet, just looking. Then slowly, he opened it. The words were simple, short, but they didn't feel simple when he read them. Please call me back. That was all. No explanation, no context, just a request. Polite, calm, but something about it felt heavy. He frowned slightly, looked again at the number. Still unfamiliar. He checked the previous messages. Nothing. No history, no connection. Just this one line. Please call me back. A small discomfort returned, stronger than last night, more noticeable. He sat up in bed, now fully awake. His eyes moved between the message and the call log. That same name, the one from last night, still there, still unanswered. He took a slow breath, then another, trying to understand why this felt different, why this simple message was creating a feeling he couldn't explain. He didn't think too much, not yet. Instead, he pressed the call button, the number from the message. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Then, someone answered. A voice, unfamiliar, soft, careful. Hello? He hesitated just for a second, then spoke. Yes, I received a message from this number. A pause on the other side. Not long, but noticeable. Yes, the voice replied. Thank you for calling back. Something in that tone felt different, not casual, not relaxed. There was something else, something he couldn't name yet. I'm sorry, he said. Who is this? Another pause, slightly longer this time. And then the answer came, slowly, gently. My name is Min. I'm calling about... Another pause. About your mother. The words landed softly, but inside him, they didn't feel soft. They felt heavy, uncertain. He straightened his back, his hand tightening slightly around the phone. "What about her?" he asked, his voice no longer calm. The person on the other end took a breath, as if choosing words carefully. "As I said, I'm very sorry to tell you this." And in that moment, before the sentence was even finished, he already knew. Not completely, not clearly, but something inside him understood. Something was wrong. Something had changed, something he cannot go back to. "She passed away last night." The words were quiet, respectful, but they didn't feel quiet inside him. They echoed, loud, endless. "She passed away last night." His mind repeated them, again and again, trying to understand, trying to accept, but not succeeding. He didn't speak. He couldn't, because suddenly there was nothing to say, nothing that made sense. The voice continued on the other end, explaining something, details, time, place, but the words became distant, faded, like they were moving further and further away, because his mind was no longer clear. It had returned to one moment, one simple moment: the phone ringing, the name on the screen, the choice he made, not now, tomorrow. "I'll call tomorrow." The thought came back with unbearable clarity, and this time, it didn't feel harmless. It didn't feel small. It felt final, because tomorrow never came. Not for that call, not for that voice. He slowly lowered the phone, the call still connected, the voice still speaking, but he couldn't hear it anymore, because something inside him had gone silent, completely silent. He sat there, on the edge of the bed, the room unchanged, the light still soft, the morning still calm, but everything felt different, because now he was living in a moment that could not be undone. He looked at his phone again, at the call log, at the missed call from the night before, the time, the name, the proof of a moment he chose to ignore. His hand trembled slightly, not violently, just enough to be noticed. He pressed on the name as if, somehow, this time it would be different, as if maybe the call would go through, as if maybe he still had a chance. The phone rang. Once, twice, 3 times. Then, nothing. No answer. Only silence. A silence that felt heavier than anything he had ever known. He lowered the phone again, slowly, carefully, as if moving too fast would break something. But something was already broken. And it wasn't outside, it was inside him. A quiet realization began to form. Not all at once, not clearly, but enough to be felt. There are moments in life that we believe we can return to, moments we think we can delay, postpone, ignore, because we trust there will always be another chance. But sometimes there isn't. Sometimes a single decision, a single delay becomes permanent. And the hardest part is not what we lost. It is knowing we had the chance and let it pass. He sat there for a long time, not moving, not thinking clearly, just existing inside that moment, a moment that would stay with him for much longer than he could imagine, because some silences do not fade. They stay, they echo, they become part of you. And this was only the beginning. The days that followed did not feel real. They moved forward, but he did not feel like he was moving with them. Time continued. Morning became afternoon. Afternoon became night. But inside him, everything felt paused, as if one moment had stopped everything else. The call, the missed call, the last chance. he didn't take. He went through the motions of daily life. He got out of bed. He walked around the apartment. He drank water. He sat. He stood. But none of it felt connected. It was like watching himself from a distance, like he was there, but not really there. People called him, friends, relatives, voices filled with concern, soft words, careful questions. Are you okay? Do you need anything? Do you want company? He answered. Sometimes. Short replies, simple words. Yes. No. I'm fine. But he wasn't fine. He just didn't know how to explain what he was feeling. Because what he felt was not only sadness, not only loss, it was something else, something heavier, something that stayed in his chest without moving. Regret, quiet, constant, unavoidable. He replayed that moment again and again, the phone ringing, the name on the screen, his hesitation, his decision. I'll call tomorrow. Each time, he hoped the memory would change, that somehow, in one version, he would pick up the phone, that he would answer, that he would say, hello. But it never changed, because reality does not rewrite itself. It stays exactly as it happened. And that was the hardest part. A few days later, he returned to her home, the place he had not visited in a long time, not because he didn't care, but because there was always something else. Work, a responsibility, time. There was always a reason to delay, always something that felt more urgent. Until now. Now. There was nothing more urgent, but also nothing left to delay. He stood outside the door, still, quiet, the key in his hand. He looked at it for a moment. Familiar, yet distant. He took a breath, then slowly opened the door. The air inside felt different, not empty, but still, too still. The kind of stillness that tells you something is missing. He stepped inside, closed the door behind him, and just stood there, listening as if expecting to hear something. A voice, a movement, a simple sound, but there was nothing, only silence. He walked slowly through the house, each step careful, as if he didn't want to disturb anything. Everything looked the same, the furniture, the small decorations, the familiar arrangement of objects. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had, because she was not there, and that absence was louder than anything else. He moved into the living room, his eyes resting on small details, a cup left on the table, a book slightly open, a pair of glasses, simple things, ordinary things. But now they felt important because they were traces of her, moments that had stopped midway. He reached out, touched the cup, still, cold, but real. He closed his eyes for a second, and a memory came back. Her voice, soft, warm, calling his name, asking simple questions. How are you? Are you eating well? When will you visit? He had answered before. Of course he had, but not always fully, not always with attention. Sometimes just quickly, just enough, because he believed there would always be more time. He opened his eyes again. The room returned, quiet, still. He walked further inside, into her bedroom. The space felt more personal, more intimate. The bed, neatly arranged. The window, slightly open. A soft breeze moving the curtains. He stepped closer, then stopped, because there, on the small table next to the bed, was her phone. He stared at it for a long moment, not moving, not breathing deeply, just looking. It was simple, nothing special, just a phone. But to him, it felt like something else, a connection, a bridge between what was and what was gone. He reached out slowly, his hand slightly shaking. Then he picked it up. The screen, dark, silent. He pressed the button. It lit up, and there, on the screen, was something he was not ready to see. A notification, a missed call. From him. The same time as last night, the same moment he decided to call back later. His breath stopped for a second, because now he was seeing it from the other side, and not as the one who missed the call, but as the one who made it. She had called him, waited, listened to the ringing, hoping he would answer. And when he didn't, what did she feel? Did she think he was busy? Did she tell herself, he'll call back later? Did she wait just a little longer? The questions filled his mind, one after another, without answers, without peace. He held the phone tightly, as if holding it could bring something back, but it couldn't, because that moment was already gone. Forever. He sat down slowly on the edge of the bed, the phone still in his hand, his eyes fixed on the screen, and for the first time, the feeling inside him became too strong to ignore. Tears quietly formed, not loud, not dramatic, just real. They fell slowly, without resistance, because there was nothing left to hold them back. He lowered his head, and finally, he allowed himself to feel it fully. The loss, the silence, the regret, all of it, at once, and in that moment, he understood something very clearly. There are words we think we can say later, calls we think we can return later, moments we believe will wait for us. But life does not always wait. Sometimes it gives us one chance, just one, and when it passes, it does not come back. He sat there for a long time, holding the phone, holding the weight of everything he could no longer change. And slowly, very slowly, he began to realize this was not just a story about a missed call. It was a story about learning to live with what cannot be undone. He stayed in that room long after the light outside began to fade, not because he had nowhere to go, but because leaving felt like letting go of something he was not ready to release. The phone was still in his hand, warm now, from the time he had held it, as if, somehow, it still carried a small piece of her presence. He looked at the screen again, the missed call, the time, the proof of a moment that could never be changed. His thumb moved slightly, hovering over her name, not pressing, just resting there, as if he was waiting for something impossible, for the phone to ring again, for her name to light up the screen, for one more chance. But nothing happened, only silence. He slowly placed the phone back on the table, carefully, gently, as if it were something fragile. Then he leaned back and closed his eyes. And for the first time, he allowed himself to remember, without trying to stop it, not just the last call, but everything before it. Moments he had forgotten, or ignored, or believed were not important enough to hold on to. Her voice, calling him in the morning, soft, patient, always the same warmth, asking simple questions. What did you eat today? Are you sleeping well? Are you taking care of yourself? Questions he used to answer quickly, sometimes without really listening, because he believed there would always be another conversation, another call, another chance to pay attention. He remembered the time she invited him to visit. Come home this weekend. Stay for dinner. It's been a while. And how many times had he replied? Maybe next week. I'm busy right now. I'll come when things are easier. Always later. Always another time. And now, those words echoed inside him, not as plans, but as reminders of what he had postponed, of what he had believed would wait. He opened his eyes slowly, and the room, still quiet, but now, filled with something else, memories, not just one, but many, layered, soft, painful. He stood up, walked slowly around the room again, this time, not looking for what was missing, but noticing what had been there all along, a small photo on the wall. He stepped closer. It was old, faded slightly, but clear enough. He was younger, standing next to her, both smiling, genuinely, without effort, without distance. He reached out, touched the frame lightly, and something inside him shifted again, because that version of him felt different, more present, more connected, less distracted by everything else. He lowered his hand and quietly asked himself, when did that change? There was no exact answer, no single moment, just a slow distance, built over time through small choices, small delays, small moments that didn't seem important at the time, until now. He moved toward the window, looked outside. The sky was darker now, evening again, another day, ending. But this time, it did not feel like just another day. Because now, he was aware of how quickly time moves, aware of how easily moments pass, aware of how fragile connection can be. He took a slow breath, then another, and something inside him began to change. Not the pain, that was still there, not the regret. That would not disappear so easily, but something beneath it, something quieter, a question. What do I do with this? Not how to erase it, not how to fix it, because he knew that was impossible, but how to live with it, how to carry it without letting it destroy everything else. He turned away from the window, walked back to the table, picked up the phone again, looked at her name, this time, not with hope, but with acceptance, a quiet understanding that this was real, that this had happened, that this was now part of his life. He held the phone for a moment longer, then, slowly, he spoke, not loudly, not clearly, just softly. I'm sorry. The words barely filled the room, but they carried everything he felt, everything he wished he had said, everything he could no longer change. I should have answered. A pause, a breath. I thought there would be time. Silence followed, but this silence felt different, not empty, not cold, just present. He closed his eyes again, let the words settle, not expecting a response, not asking for one, just allowing them to exist. Because sometimes the words we say too late are still important, not to change the past, but to begin accepting it. He opened his eyes, placed the phone down, and this time, he stepped away, not running, not avoiding. Just moving forward, slowly, carefully. He walked toward the door, paused for a moment, looked back one last time, at the room, at the space filled with memories, and quietly, he nodded, not in agreement, not in peace, but in recognition of what was, of what had been lost, of what could never be returned. Then, he opened the door and stepped outside. The air felt different, cooler, wider. He took a deep breath, and for the first time since that call, he felt something new. Not relief, not happiness, but movement. A small step away from the moment that had held him still. Because even though the past cannot be changed, life continues. And somehow, he would have to learn how to continue with it. In the days that followed, the world did not slow down. People still walked through the streets, cars still passed with quiet rhythm, the sky still changed from morning light to evening shadow. Everything continued, and slowly, so did he. Not all at once, not in a clear direction, but in small steps, very small steps. At first, it was just breathing a little deeper, noticing the air as it entered and left his body, allowing himself to feel what he had been avoiding. Then, it was sitting in silence, not running from the thoughts, not distracting himself, just sitting, letting the memories come, letting the regret stay, without pushing it away, because he began to understand that pain does not leave when we ignore it. It stays quiet, patient, until we are ready to face it. And so, he stopped running. He stayed, with the silence, with the memories, with the moment he could not change. There were days when the weight felt too heavy, days when the thought returned again and again. I should have answered, and each time it hurt, not less, not softer, just familiar. But something else began to grow beside it. Not strong at first, not clear, but present, understanding. A quiet voice inside him asking a different question. What would she want for you now? He did not answer immediately. Because the question felt important, it deserved more than a quick reply, so he carried it with him. Through the day, through the silence, through the quiet moments when nothing else demanded his attention, and slowly, an answer began to form, not in words, but in feeling. She would not want him to stay stuck. She would not want him to live only in that one moment. She would not want his life to become a memory of regret, because her voice, in every memory, had always been gentle, always caring, always full of life. And that life was not something meant to stop. Even now, he began to change small things, very small things. He called people when he thought of them, not later, and not tomorrow, now. Even if it was just a short call, even if it felt a little uncomfortable, because now he understood how much those moments matter. He visited places he had been delaying. He showed up when it was not convenient, because connection is not built in perfect timing. It is built in presence. He started to listen more, not just to respond, but to understand, to feel the words behind the words, to be there fully. And each time he did, something inside him softened. Not the regret, that was still there, but the way he carried it changed. It became a reminder, not just of what he lost, but of how he wanted to live. One afternoon, he returned again to her home, not with fear this time, not with hesitation, but with a quiet intention. He stepped inside. The air still carried that familiar stillness, but it no longer felt overwhelming. It felt peaceful in a gentle way. He walked to the same room, the same table, the same place where everything had become clear. He sat down, took out his phone, and for a moment, he simply held it, not looking at the screen, just feeling its presence. Then slowly, he opened it, scrolled through his contacts, stopped at her name. His finger rested there. But this time, he did not feel the same sharp pain. He felt something softer, something quieter. He pressed on it, not to call, but to see. And the name, the number, still there, still part of his world, even if she was not. He took a deep breath, then gently. He spoke again, not asking, not wishing, just sharing. I'm learning. A pause. to not wait another breath, to not delay what matters. His voice, steady, honest. I'm sorry for that call. The words still carried weight, but they no longer felt like a wound. They felt like truth. And truth has a way of bringing a quiet kind of peace. He placed the phone down, looked around the room one more time. But this time, he was not looking for what was missing. He was noticing what remained: the warmth, the memories, the love that did not disappear with one moment, because even though he missed that call, everything before it was still real, still meaningful, still part of him, and that could never be taken away. He stood up slowly, walked toward the door, paused, just for a moment, and smiled, softly, not because everything was okay, but because he was learning how to be okay with what was not. He stepped outside. The air felt fresh, open, full of movement. He took a deep breath and began to walk, not away from the past, but forward, with it, carrying it, understanding it, letting it shape him, without holding him back. Because some moments cannot be changed. Some calls cannot be answered again, but the life that continues after is still ours to live, still ours to choose. And maybe that is the quiet lesson behind everything: to answer when it matters, to show up when we can, to say the words before it is too late. And when it is too late, to forgive ourselves gently, slowly, honestly. If this story touched you, if it reminded you of someone or something you've been meaning to do, don't wait. Make the call, send the message, be present. And if you want more slow, meaningful stories to help you learn English and reflect on life, subscribe to the channel and come back for the next story. Because sometimes the smallest moments are the ones we remember forever.